Good morning, commissioners. Welcome back. Thursday morning, it's bright and sunny outside. Beautiful fall morning here in Northern California. All right, well, we had a productive day yesterday. Thank you for your engagement, your input, your ideas. We did a lot. So just want to thank you for that. Matt, thanks again for your work, putting it all together for us. Executive or Director of our Special Ed Division, Kristin Wright, welcome. It was great to have Stacy back yesterday too. It was nice to see her. She did a great job. We missed you. So let's get started. Matt, you want to go ahead and call roll?
Absolutely. Michelle Andrews.
Here.
Mildred Brown. He's here. Okay. Oh. Summer Harding. Vania Hayes-White.
Here.
Sarah Jocham. April Lopez.
Here.
Christina Mills.
Here.
Gloria Perez-Stewart.
Here.
Gina Plate.
Here.
Kayla Rodriguez. Kimberly Salmonson.
Here.
Barbara Schulman. Janine Topalian.
Here.
David Toston.
Here.
Steve Winlock. Here. Leanne Liebes. We have a quorum.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matt. Havania, would you like to lead us in flag salute?
Please rise. Right hand over your heart. Ready to begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Welcome to day number 2. All right, Michelle, would you like to give us an overview of what we're going to do today?
Sure thing. We are going to have an assessment update, and then we're going to go on to the state performance plan, and Shiloh's going to be here to discuss that. We get to take a quick break, and after that, we're going to have breakout discussion about the state performance plan in our small groups. And following that, we'll hear from Kristin Wright, which we're happy to have you here today, and then voices from the field. So if you have any comment or anything you'd like to bring up, that's the time for that. And finally, we'll have general public comment and any comment on the next agenda for our meeting in February, and then we're done quite early today.
Fantastic. Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, we do. We are ending earlier than our normal time today. Thanks for all the input everyone gave about the transition conference. I know many folks are planning on going to the transition conference. We did the survey at the end of the last meeting. Just appreciate that and appreciate folks being thought partners as we put this agenda together. So I know that it's a lot during this busy time of year to be away for a couple of days, but thank you for making the time and the commitment. And I think yesterday was just such a great demonstration of what we can accomplish as a group. And like we said yesterday, with a new administration coming in, being able to leverage the expertise of this group to let them know that we are their special ed body they should be referring to inform policies, the platform, the introductory letter that we discussed and you all put together pieces of yesterday. I'm excited to make sure that that moves forward. And Kimberly and Stephen, thank you for your agreeing to willingness to continue that conversation outside of this meeting so that we finalize the platform and then bring it back in February. So excited about that. Any announcements, anything we need to know before we jump into the content of our day today? All righty, well then let's get started on item number 10. We're actually going to take a look quickly at other items. Before we get started on item number 10, we are Great. Well, fantastic. So maybe we'll go ahead and start with an update from Director Wright, not to put her on the spot as she walks in the door, but, you know, flexibility is the name of the game. How do you feel about that?
That's what special education is about.
Perfect.
To be at the ready.
At the ready.
Okay, let me just pull up my notes. Thank you to my trusted staff.
Well, and yesterday we had a couple of moments where we asked Matt how he feels about it, and he was good, right? He kept us in check.
Great. So I'm sorry that I missed you all yesterday. I was in Phoenix attending a technical assistance session with a number of other states, and one of the things that we have to do as a state and all states have to do is take time to receive technical assistance when we have areas, and you'll hear a little bit more from Shiloh this morning, as we are seeking to improve overall as a state. We go and learn with and from other states about what they're doing. And as you also probably know, there's great benefit to hearing others that are on the same path. And it's reaffirming in some ways that that everyone across the nation are basically struggling with the same things. So we are not, we feel unique, and we're California and we are unique, but at the same time, every single state is having the same issues around disproportionality, around how to move the needle and increasing achievement for their students with disabilities, and making sure that they're included. And so lots of folks are at different stages, and we came back with some new ideas, and we shared some ideas with other states that they're going to be taking advantage of. So anyway, that's where I was yesterday. So there are a couple of federal updates I'd love to give you some information on. The first one is, as you may know, the way that the federal U.S. Department of Education is structured is they have a person who's in charge of OSERS, which is the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services, and they oversee vocational rehab, which in California is Department of Rehab, and special education. And then underneath that umbrella is a director of voc rehab and a director of OSEP, the Office of Special Education Programs. And there's been an acting director in that role for the last 3 years. Her name's Ruth Wright, and she's great. And she is still the deputy director, but there's been a newly appointed director as of a few weeks ago. And her name is Lori Vanderplug, and she was appointed by Johnny Collette. And she came from, as president of the Council for Exceptional Children, and some of the folks, I think Maureen knows her, and she's a parent of a child with a disability, I think a young adult with a disability, and also has a ton of experience. She's done a lot of work with CASE and the Council for Exceptional Children, and she comes from a district in Michigan. So she will be our new OSEP director, and that is who we take our cues from in terms of how we as a state get information and behave around our federal indicators, which you'll hear about this morning. And one more point about that, I think we sent out the Rethinking Special Education OSEP blog post and a framework that sort of talked a little bit about rethinking special education. And so those are just some early signals from the U.S. Department of Education that they're thinking about just how to improve and think about the indicators and how we're measured as states, and what they're focused on moving forward. We don't have many more details on that yet, but as soon as we get details, we'll make sure to share those with you so we can talk about how those impact California. One of the ones they're continuing to look at, as you may know, is the significant disproportionality regs and methodology, and as you also know, California is continuing the course that we have been in terms of identifying districts as significantly disproportionate. And just a little brief update on the statewide system of support and where we are with where does special ed fit in and where the SELPA leads fit in. We're just getting ready to receive the requests for application that have been out in the world for the SELPA leads, for the systems improvement leads. And so if you remember, there was $10 million that was put in the budget, Prop 98 funds, to go towards bringing special ed into the state system of support. There's community engagement leads, there's regional leads, and there's special ed leads. And those special ed leads were put out for application for SELPAs to build capacity amongst SELPAs to be able to support LEAs. And so the first part of that money, which is $6 million, has been out for a little while in a request for application, and so we'll be receiving those. And then the second $4 million will be for SELPA content leads, and that will go out sometime next month, and we'll be selecting those by around the beginning of the year. So what's great about that is that as part of our one coherent system, SELPAs will be at the table and special ed will be at the table as the regional leads in California meet together on a regular basis to plan how to assist regionally local educational agencies. So I think it's an exciting time, and you know, a lot of that is because of your advocacy and making sure that special ed's voices are heard, and they certainly have been. And so more to come on that as we get more information out and we select those leads, and then we'll be able to talk about then what? Then how does that all fit together? I had the opportunity to have a lot of recent travels, and a couple that I'd like to highlight. I had the opportunity to speak to about 400 parents in San Bernardino a few weeks ago at one of the parent conferences on the weekend. That was a great honor always to speak to parents and families, and it just reinforces the necessity for our family empowerment centers and our parent training and information centers who helped to put this on in working with the regional center to really make sure that our families are getting the information they need. And I had a huge line after the conference of parents who, you know, had questions that I was happy to refer those questions back to our family empowerment centers. But what it told me was there's still such a need out there to support families in each individually wanting what's best for their kids. And I had a lot of questions about inclusion and support for inclusion and how someone might talk about, and when they're in IEPs, how do you know what you should be advocating for as a parent? So it just brought home the need for just more information going out there to families. I also had the opportunity to sit on some different panels, and one of them was in Long Beach, at Cal State Long Beach, where the CSU system has really taken this one coherent system notion extremely seriously. And Marquita Grinout-Shire, who's a deputy chancellor with the CSU system, who was the dean of education in Long Beach and who was a former special ed teacher, has been leading a really wonderful charge around ensuring that general ed and special ed are really working together. And they have, Cal State Long Beach has a really interesting dual credential program that is training to have teachers leave with both their general ed and special ed credentials. And this is sort of spreading CSU-wide around this, bringing general ed and special ed together to train teachers. And as you also may know, the $100 million will be going out this fall from the Commission on Teacher Credentialing for teacher residencies and innovations around increasing ed specialists in California. I don't think you didn't have an update yesterday from CTC, right? So I can talk about it. Okay. So what's happening with the CTC? They are working on the last pieces of defining the ed specialist credential. So what would it mean to be, who can an ed specialist serve if they're a teacher of mild to moderate support needs or extensive support needs? I don't believe that's planned to come back to the CTC until the first of the year. So we'll keep you apprised if anything comes out around that, but they're still working internally to try to figure out the language and working with some folks to try to figure out what exactly that delineation would be and how that will work in the field. And California attended a 1% alternative assessment threshold meeting in Boston, and California has met the 1%. But we are continuing to address and make sure that districts are supported in understanding that that 1% threshold, while each individual student has the right to, through the IEP team, decide which assessments they're taking, that if there are LEAs that are much over, that we'll be working with them just to make sure that everyone's on the same page around training and understanding how to try to keep us within that range. There are some discussions federally about what that means. There's a number of states who are highly over the 1%, and we had conversations with them this past week about how they feel about that, and so more to come on that in the future as well. A quick update on the alternate diploma. As you know, the California Transition Alliance has been working over the past few years to really look at the flexibility of using the IEP to receive a traditional high school diploma, and then what the other diploma options are. As we've talked about before, there is an option under ACSE to have to allow for students who take the alternate assessment and are on an alternate track, meaning with the standards, not alternate track, like not, getting a diploma. The ones who typically have gotten a certificate, that those students would be eligible if California decided to evolve the alternate or the certificate of completion into an alt diploma, to be able to count for accountability and to receive a valid high school diploma, which would be the alternate diploma. So we've started to have conversations about what that would need to look like statutorily. That's something that is not a regulation. That's something that the legislature would need to change. So as we talk about that a little more, we'll probably bring the whole idea back again to you at your next meeting to get additional feedback from you and support. And for this year, in terms of what a certificate, I think you guys have had conversations with Cindy and Jenny in the Accountability Division about what counts. Those conversations are continuing, and I think we are all kind of on the same page in that that we want something that's meaningful for our students with significant disabilities in California that can take them on into jobs and productive lives, and having something that is of utility. So we've been talking to other states too about what they've been doing, and there's some interesting ideas across states, anything from states that have credentials for all students that go along with their diploma, that talk about the job skills and experiences they've had in school, all the way to states like Louisiana that have two different kinds of diplomas, a CTE diploma and a regular graduation diploma, and then hooked onto those are alternate pathways that all lead to a valid high school diploma. And so we'll have to talk as a state, and our policymakers will have to talk about, what makes sense for California. But it's my hope that we can, at the very least, evolve our certificate of completion into an alternate diploma that really does mean something for our students and that has utility for them, and that also counts for our districts for accountability. Because I think the bottom line is we want to encourage our LEAs and schools to give our students the most opportunity to learn their grade level standards and to have all the skills they need to get good jobs. And we are also continuing to partner and work with SELPA on the annual budget plan template and the assurances and the things that came out in the budget last year. I think those will come to probably your next meeting for you guys to review, so stay tuned for that. Just wanted to briefly mention the timeline around the election. So as you all know, I'll be getting a new boss, and so will the state. And many things will shift here. Hopefully, we'll stay the course around other things, and we look forward to continuing the course that we're on in special education around supporting one coherent system and really being involved in all of the conversations foundationally in the state around how we can plan for our students with disabilities from the build and not as an add-on later. So the election will happen, and the officers, like the superintendent, will not be sworn in, the new ones, until January. So there'll be a transition between that time, but officially they start in January. And I talked about the ed specialist update. So for the state special schools, you'll notice that we don't have Scott Kirby here. That's because he flew off on a plane and moved to Nevada to take care of his grandchild and his lovely retirement. He's very excited about that. And so currently there is out in the world, and we can send you the link actually if you know someone, a job available for director of state special schools. And so if you know that perfect person that fits that niche, that job is available and open, and we welcome them to come into the state, whether it's from another state or from California already. And in the meantime, they're doing a lot of strategic planning with the superintendents of the special schools, and currently that is in the branch under Nick Schweitzer, who's acting in that role until there's someone else who has been hired. And that is my update. And do you have any questions or other things for me before I hand it back over?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead, Mildred.
In regards to the alternative diploma, it'd be really, I think, helpful to have community college input along with university input, because what happens in the other states when they do have the alternative, it's not that students are finding if they have IEPs or Section 504 plans and they graduated with an alternative, they still can't do very much with it. So they find themselves having to go back to community college and still get a actual, either something like the GED or high school equivalency. So I just think that in talking to some of the people, particularly in Louisiana, that Katrina had a lot to do with students' records not being available, and they came up with this alternative, and it hasn't worked out really well as far as the viability of the actual alternative. It's there and it's available, but then what can people do with it? The unemployment rate is super high, and even in Louisiana, and students have just not been able to get work. I did a project there, and that's why I know that.
I think we have to make sure it has utility. I could not agree more. I think
it might be helpful to be sure that the community college.
Absolutely. It's a key part of our trajectory. Absolutely. Thank you. That's a great point.
Thanks, Mildred. Thank you, Kristin, for your update. Yesterday, we did have Cindy Kazanis and Jenny Singh here who talked about the accountability system, and they talked about the certificate of completion. And what was really evident throughout their entire presentation was, we were thrilled originally that students with disabilities were included in the accountability system, but yesterday, when we brought up the nuances of the different types of settings to be thinking about and the different types of student needs that we all encounter, they had a plan, they had a response, they talked about the engagement with you and your staff as they're thinking through that. So definitely appreciate the work that you and your department are doing.
Partners.
Good.
In making sure that they really do want to get this right. So to the degree you also have ahas when you're thinking about this, please reach out and let us know, because we're definitely wanting to make this work.
Great. There was a question that came up yesterday in the subcommittee meeting about changes, and you I appreciated your comment just now about the work continuing the way it is right now through a new administration and our commitment to one coherent system. And so there was Mildred raised a question that came up in the Mental Health Committee about some structural changes and staffing changes, but not necessarily a change to the work. And I wondered if there was any high-level information you wanted to share, or maybe we could update the group later on what, if any, staffing changes are happening right now within the division or across the departments.
So as you know, we did a reorg this last January, and so we're in the process right now of, this is really the first time, and I'm glad you mentioned that because that was the one thing that I did want to mention, is that my staff in the special ed division is pedaling fast and hard. As you know, the data just all came out that we'll be presenting to you today. And so in an attempt to try to align that with the dashboard, everything that used to happen over the whole year is happening in the next few months. And so everyone is compressed to try to really pedal fast to make sure that we front load all of our LEAs with the right information. So when the dashboard comes out, they have all this underbelly information that they could say, okay, let's really talk about this. And so I just want to give a shout out to the special ed division staff that they've been doing an excellent job at holding it together. I know there's a lot of pressure right now, particularly with the data folks and all the the monitoring folks, as well as our folks in complaints. Everyone is pedal to the metal around trying to make this work out so that we can really give the right information to the field. And even though there's a few bumps, I think this is really our maiden voyage year of trying to have this all work out. So I hope you'll bear with us as we continue on our continuous improvement for next year on the lessons learned this year. But I'm excited that that this is happening. And in fact, it was a conversation with other states, and they said, "Well, that's a good idea. You guys are giving everyone the information they need, so when the larger information comes out," and some of the other states were like, we're gonna come talk to you guys and try to do the same thing. And that was one of the other bigger picture things when we were talking to our federal partners was we want to give folks current data because we don't want to have 2-year data when we're trying to talk about what's happening today and in the dashboard, having data that's not consistent from years ago kept coming up year after year as an issue. So this year, for the most part, we have all current data, which is also a pretty huge feat. So excited about that. And so we'll see how it translates as we try to get more, as we try to give the field more about how to use the data to inform like their root causes and things like that. So anyway.
I don't think it was when Dan Sacram used to come to our mental health meeting. He talked about his department being split and that he wasn't sure where he was going to wind up, but we're concerned because that department did most of the work around addressing suicide prevention. And we had talked about it in our
I can bring more information back next meeting or later today, but what I do know is that the work will all continue, but the folks that were in, I think you're talking about Gordon Jackson's division, are still here. They're just in other divisions continuing the work.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for being flexible and doing your update early, too. I appreciate that. All right, so speaking of pedaling fast, we have Michelle Center and Linda Hopper Hooper, thank you, sorry about that, from the Assessment, Development, and Administration Division. So Michelle, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for your patience. Welcome. I know this is a tough season right now as all this data is.
Well, I'm waiting for when it isn't, and I'm
Well,
waiting for that
yeah,
to
right.
happen. So these are working, right? For some reason, doesn't sound like it. Okay. All right. So thought today we would talk about the new science test for the most part because we haven't talked about the science test with you in a while. We have come and presented on the alternate assessment, but not so much on the California science test. So we refer to that as the CAST. And I noticed that Barbara's not here to yell at me about the use of acronyms today. I'm sure one of you will take the lead on that with her absence, but she's watching. Okay. So we're going to talk about the CAST today. So with the adoption of the California Next Generation Science Standards, we really went down a new road in terms of those standards. They were very innovative in the sense that they now had multidimensionality to them. So our Next Generation Science Standards actually look at both science concepts, principles, as well as practices. And so those are the three dimensions. We refer to those as the DCI, the disciplinary core ideas, the SEPs, or the science and engineering practices, and the CCCs and the cross-cutting concepts. So those are the three dimensions. So when we talk about dimensionality, that's what we're referring to today. So we had the challenge of developing a test that was also multidimensional, that looked at all three. And if we look back at the kind of tests we did before, we mostly were testing content, or the DCIs, knowledge of that, for the most part. We had some of the other dimensions in there, but there really wasn't this strong intent to have that happen in every single item that was put before a child. And so that was our task. And so in order to do that, we came up with our goals. We always like to start off with goals before we come back with the design of an assessment to really focus what our priorities were. So in this case, we wanted to promote improvements in teaching and learning. And part of that is defined as this multidimensionality approach. In other words, just not the task of remembering science content that we all know is changes quite often, right? What we know in science one day and what we know the next year changes. And so we really want to build in the multidimensionality. We wanted to incentivize teaching of science in all grades, not just the grades that we happen to give a test in. We wanted to measure both the range as well as the depth of these new standards and provide models of high quality items so that they could look at these as models and potentially use them to develop their own assessments for classroom use. And we wanted to also recognize that we want to minimize testing time. We don't want our students engaging in summative statewide tests longer than necessary in order to get the information that we need. So this is the timeline. It's up there fully to amaze you all in terms of where we are, because now we see that star is like we're near the end. So we have been working on the development of this test for many years, as you can see. And we are getting towards the end. We will be administering an operational assessment this year. We will be going before our board with threshold scores, sometimes referred to cut scores. But if any of you had the privilege of that board item, when one of the state board members said, "It sounds like I'm cutting children," I now try and never use that term, but so threshold scores, often called cut scores, where we go and we determine what the levels are for our assessment. So that'll be coming also later next calendar year. So what we have done is in November 2017, the state board approved the science blueprint. We also had the state board approve the reporting structure as well as general achievement level descriptors. All of that has already been done and taken before our state board for action. The blueprint that we brought before the board looks nothing like any blueprint for a test that we've ever done. It has a very different format to it because of the multidimensional nature of the standards. But what it does do is it recognizes the need to measure the depth as well as breadth of the standards at an appropriate rigor in a multidimensional nature. The other thing that is important to recognize is that the blueprint acknowledges the environmental principles and concepts that are in the California Next Generation Science Standards. And we use those environmental principles and concepts as context for assessment items on our test. And in fact, I think they're one of the more popular contexts for art item writers to engage in here in California. So here is a screenshot of part 1 of our blueprint. And what you can tell if you want to engage in the blueprint, which is posted on our website, is that the content is broken down by 3 different domains, 3 different science domains. We have physical science, life science, and earth and space science represented in our test. Each of those domains has approximately 1/3 of the test. There's also a second part of the blueprint, and we find that this part of the blueprint, we've heard from our teachers in California that they find part 2 useful in terms of their classroom work. So what this chart does, it's a chart with a whole bunch of X's on it. It actually documents where there is an intersection between those 3 dimensions that I talked about. And so every time there's an X, then that means that there's a performance expectation where there is an intersection of a DCI, SEP, and a cross-cutting concept. And so if you look at this, this is very helpful for an educator to kind of know where those things are intersecting. If any of you have dived into the content of the blueprint, you would recognize that you can teach these without narrowing it down to what this chart shows. So for example, one of our cross-cutting concepts is looking at patterns. Well, you can look at patterns in almost every single performance expectation that is in the standards, though for an assessment purpose, we narrow it down to what is explicitly stated in the standards, which is what this chart shows, is what is explicitly stated in the standards. So this is the high-level test design, and it's a little complex compared to some of our other assessments here in California. And I think we've talked about this before, but let's go through it again because I know you don't live and breathe this every day. So it's easy to forget. So our science test will have 3 segments, segments A, B, and C. Segment A is where we look at wanting to ensure that we have a large breadth of measurement. So these are standalone items. They are machine scorable items. So they're not necessarily multiple choice items. For example, they could be drag and drop items. They could be something called a hotspot item where you're doing something on a screen related to an area. They could be a graph on a screen, anything that could be machine scorable and is standalone, maybe 1 item, maybe 2 coupled together, but very, very short in nature. What you'll notice, though, if you look at the very bottom of the column marked segment A, is also that we only give the test in grades 5, 8, and once in high school, but the content is not limited to those grades. So this is our intent to really incentivize the teaching of science beginning in kindergarten. You'll see that grade 5 intentionally includes 3 through 5 with a footnote that the foundational concepts actually begin in kindergarten for that particular assessment. And then our grade 8 test actually has performance expectations from grades 6 to 8 and so forth. And so you can see that we're trying to really capture a wide, the breadth of the performance expectations in segment A. Segment B is different. Segment B is where we want to measure something deeply. You can't measure very deeply in these short questions that are machine scorable. So segment B allows us to have a portion of the test that is a performance task, actually more, there's 2 performance tasks. So they're longer in nature. You're able to dig into the content more. We're able to require some items that have some human scoring in them. And they also have that same expectation where we can look at performance expectations that are outside of that particular grade to really try and incentivize this teaching in all grades. So that's segment B. So segment C, for this particular year, yes.
Sorry to interrupt you, Michelle. We have a question, so I wondered if we could take.
Sure.
Yeah. come on in.
Did I hear the testing starts in grade 5 for the science?
Yes. Grade
So not
5,
in
8
third,
in high school.
not in 3rd grade.
Correct. 5, 8 in high school.
Thank you.
So Segment C is this year all field test items. We need some time to write new items and get some data on them, so we'll solely be using that for that purpose. But in the future, we will be using that to gather some additional information in an assessment context called matrix sampling, where we're able to sample some additional content. And when we combine a whole bunch of students together, we now have a lot more information about a school or a district that they could use than any one student. So it allows us to get more information without increasing testing time, which in this case, the limit was 2 hours was our goal. So here is a visual nature of some additional test features that we will eventually put into place pending some further data analysis and studies that we have planned for this year. And we're trying to visually depict a couple of the features. So segment A, remember those are those discrete standalone items that are short. What we want to do is have a multi-stage adaptive for that portion of the test. If we remember what that means is all students would get a set of items to begin with. They would vary in difficulty, and depending on how they perform in that, then the next set of items they receive in segment A would correlate to how they perform. So either more items that are at an easier, middle, or more difficult area. This allows us to have some more precision in our measurement without having to have as many items as you would need in a more complex test design. So the other feature that we are looking at is what is referred to as the screener. So you did hear that we have 3 domains that I mentioned before, right? Earth and space science, physical science, and life science. Those are our 3 domains. And you may have noticed me saying that there are 2 performance tasks, not 3. So students do not receive 1 in each of those because of the length of time that would take. So we wanted to ensure that when we measure something deeply, that the student had a chance of really showing what they know. So we wanted to screen out for students that had a really low performance relative to how they performed in the others. So these are all features that will not be in this year's. These are features that we are studying with this year's test to determine whether to implement them in the future. So as you can tell, it's a fairly sophisticated design. So then the question is, what can we say? We give the test, what can we say about how students perform? And what you'll notice about the descriptor that is before you is that it is multidimensional. In other words, we don't go out and say, in terms of the content, they know X. In terms of the practices, they know this. We keep everything combined in the multidimensional nature in which it is taught and the way that it is measured. So this is reflected in the statement about what we can say about students, in particular when we make the statement that they have an understanding of the California Next Generation Science Standards at a level or that at a thorough, adequate, partial, or minimal ability to apply his or her knowledge and skills in the science and engineering practices, disciplinary core ideas, and cross-cutting concepts. So you'll see that we keep all of those combined in what we can say about the scores and student performance. So that's important to remember. In terms of reporting, like I said, the state board did already approve the reporting structure for this test, and this is a visual depiction of that reporting structure. There will be an overall score for science in general, as well as the levels, and then there will be information reported out at the 3 domains there, the life science, physical, earth, and space. So that will be the reporting structure for students. The next thing I wanted to report out are test item specifications. I'm not sure if any of you or if any of you that are in a school environment have had your teachers attend one of our CAST academies or not, but this is one of the products that we go through in our training. So a test item specification document is developed and normally used by our item writers to develop items. And then we use it to review those items to ensure that they're high quality. But in doing so, we recognize very early on that the item specifications really provided some valuable information if we could get it in the hands of teachers. So we are currently working on making the depictions of our item specifications 508 compliant so that we can post those on our website for use by educators in California. So what these item specifications will do is it provides examples of how you integrate those 3 dimensions. And by giving examples that are based in scientific phenomena, it really starts spurring the ideas within our teachers about how to start their implementation of instruction in terms of these new sets of standards. So we've received very positive feedback in terms of every time we have a training, I get at least one email saying, and when will these be posted? Even though I'm not even in the room. So I know that people really do want these, and we're working on it. So next I wanted to take you through an actual sample item so that you can see what I mean by multidimensional. The item that we have selected to show you is a segment A item. In fact, it is much more difficult to write our shorter items than it is our longer ones to make them multidimensional. It's hard to fit all of those into a short machine scoreable item. And so we wanted to show you how you can do that. You know, from that timeline, you can see that we've been working many years to get to where we are. So this is, I think, going to run through on the screen. You can see it's an inline choice. In other words, there's 2 drop-down boxes related to the question of this item. And we're going to take this item, we're going to dissect this item and how it relates to the 3 dimensions that are in the science. The first thing to recognize is that all of our items are based on scientific phenomena, and we document the phenomena that each item is assessing. And we also document the performance expectation that we are looking at. And so we can look here, and the sample we're going to look at today is heredity, inheritance, and variation of traits. They tried to give me an example that I could even understand. And that was the requirement when they put this together. So if you actually pulled up the next generation science standards, you would get this nice colorful graphic of the performance expectations and the 3-dimensional representation of that. And if you're an item writer, you would say, oh gosh, no, I cannot write an item that includes all of that in one thing. Am I going to have them sit there for 8 hours? And so that was our first struggle. And so we recognized we needed to break things apart. And this is why those specs documents are so helpful to our educators, is because this is actually what our teachers probably need to be doing themselves, is breaking these performance expectations into, in our case, it was measurable components. In their case, it is components for which they can teach in a logical sequence. So the first thing we did is we looked at the practice, and the practice was inclusive of many different components, and it was too broad to measure. So we have taken all of the practices that are in the standards, and we've broken them down into more measurable components, and we refer to them as sub-practices. And we did this purely for assessment purposes. This is not for any other purpose other than to develop a test. Though we do plan on showing it publicly, it really was for us. So this doesn't show all of the sub-practices that we developed, but it does show the one that we will be talking about in terms of the marigold item. So you'll see here that we're looking at the use of evidence to support an explanation. So if we look at the sample item that we had before you, and we look at kind of what are some of the things that we were able to dissect from this practice, it was things like the ability of used data to support or refute an explanatory account, blah, blah, blah. So if we look at our sample, we can see, oh, we have things like more flowers. We have things like quantitative and observed. We can see that there. We have the ability to use data. Oh, we have things like number of flowers, 1 flower. We get into more, less. So we can see how we use that sub-practice in what, in this case, I think is a very simple way, which I think is important to show our teachers that may be struggling right now with the complexity of the set of standards in front of them. The next is the content or the disciplinary core idea, which again was too broad in its original nature to assess. So we broke that up into smaller chunks. And if you look here, you'll see 3 smaller chunks, all of them relating to the environment and different ways that the environment influences traits. So if you look at how did we do that in our simple item, you'll see we're referring to things like the sunny area. How did the environment of marigolds in the sun versus marigolds in the shade affect the traits that they were displaying, the number of flowers on the plant? And so you'll see how that is now coupled with the practice that we had before. And then the next thing is, because everything is 3-dimensional, is the cross-cutting concept. What is the cross-cutting concept we're trying to measure? Cause and effect. And so you'll see that the cause and effect is here. The effect is number of flowers, and the cause is does not receive enough light energy. And so you'll see we've taken what really was a fairly simple item about how access to light is impacting this plant and really shown how it includes all 3 dimensions of science. This has been very helpful for those educators who have gone to our training and really spent some time thinking about this. Some of them, I think, walk away with, oh, yes, I've done some of this. I'm not that far off. Whereas when they have just looked at the standards themselves, they may have been a little overwhelmed. So that was our sample item. Now, let me go into some things that will be new for 2018-19. We are starting testing January 8th, 2019. Like, we're constantly testing. We do test every day. Now that we have interim assessments available, we are always in testing season. But CAST operational starts January 8th, 2019. We will also be posting new practice tests that have full-length performance tests in them and updated training tests in November. So those are coming right out. We have accessibility resources. There's been some improvements to those. Things like a glossary to include Hmong is one. The transition from Streamline View, which some of you may be familiar with, it's a way to make the screen look simpler for students, and so that has been particularly important for some students that are overwhelmed by looking at the screen and all the different buttons and how it's laid out. The Streamline actually makes the screen go in this direction instead of having to look at the different panels. So that's helpful for some students, and it's always been available as an accommodation. What we've done is we've made that a designated support so that more students have access to that particular accessibility resource, even if they don't have an IEP, they could get access to that. The other universal tool we have, and that is important that we talk about this whenever we can, is the Desmos calculator. So hopefully you're familiar with the Desmos calculator. As far as I know, it's the most accessible calculator on the market. It's also free. So it is the calculator that is used on our Smarter Balanced Math assessment, and it will be the calculator used on the science assessment. We highly encourage all of our teachers to use this during instruction throughout the year so that students become familiar with the Desmos calculator. And if you haven't had a demo of how a visually impaired student accesses the Desmos calculator, you might want someone to do that. Probably not me, but you might want someone to do that. I have witnessed that demonstration, and it was very engaging and impressive. And so I think I actually, when I saw the presentation on the Desmos calculator, I was with Martha Thurlow, and I'm sure you all know Martha. And Martha was awed and amazed at the ability of this calculator and its accessibility features.
Can you just talk, Michelle, just a minute about when a student is using the calculator, do they most often use it using their mouse click to click on the number, or do they use it on the number key on the keyboard?
I think you can use both, but So you can use both. In order for it to be accessible, we have to have the ability to not require the mouse, right? And so you can use both. But the other thing that the Desmos calculator does is it converts graphics into sound. So they can read, I'm not sure that's the sensitive way of saying it, but they can read a graph by listening to sound. And so that was very interesting to learn about. And we do have particular items that utilize that, particularly in our math assessment. So it's a resource that hopefully more and more of our teachers will utilize, and it's something that we talk about wherever we go to try and encourage. We have heard individual accounts of teachers that are transitioning to using this as their everyday calculator in their classroom. Of course, if students have a calculator that they use and they have an IEP and they need to use that particular calculator, then that is allowed. The other thing that we are working on posting is a new periodic table, because we recognized we needed to have a periodic table that was fully accessible. And so the new periodic table, you will be able to read the periodic table with JAWS. And so that will be posted outside of the testing environment so that teachers can use that in the classroom every day. So we're working on posting that. So I think that's pretty exciting. We thought we had an accessible version before, but we could do better, so we are. So here are some key messages that we have been talking about as we build our science test. I think it's important for all of us to remember that the transition to the new science standards is a very big transition. It's a transition for everyone, not only for us developing the test, but for our teachers, for our administrators, for our accountability system, for our individuals providing professional development and learning opportunities. And so we have to recognize that this is going to take time to implement those standards and have expectations for performance that are realistic given where we are in the implementation of those standards. So I think that's important for us to recognize and support as we do that transition. And so we are doing our part by providing training to teachers, and I know everyone is doing what we can with the resources that we have been provided to us. So switching on to a different topic other than the new science test, wanted to give you this update. Gina thought you would all want to hear it. It's a little early, so I don't have too much to say, but we will be posting the 17-18 assignment information for Smarter Balance related to designated supports and accommodations. I know you're always interested in knowing that individuals are being provided access, and so we will be posting that in November. Early indications are that for both designated supports as well as accommodations, there was a slight increase this year. I don't yet have the data here in the department, so I can't tell you what specific supports did see increases. The next really exciting work, and also a little overwhelming, is this work to determine whether or not they use the support. So you'll see on the right-hand slide a list of supports that we are going to be investigating. Glossary, highlighter, line reader, that line there. Those are the resources that we're going to look at whether or not a student actually used them. So for each item, and in some cases it's not an item, for many of these it is, did they actually use that resource? Did they mask something? Did they highlight something? And so we'll be looking at that, and right now we are in the very beginning stages. We just received that. Our contractor just received that data file. And really thinking about the kinds of questions that our districts may want to ask themselves if they start seeing large discrepancies between assignment and usage. That could mean a variety of things. I think we have a question.
So I was wondering, are these accommodations available to students only with IEPs, or are these accessibility resources that are available to all students, like you said on the other slide?
Okay. So the list here includes some that are designated supports. So in other words, any student who has an adult who designates a need, they don't have to have an IEP. So for example, an English learner may be assigned access to a glossary even a student who is redesignated but still fluent, for example, in Spanish, may benefit from having access to a glossary, and so that could be a sign. Some of these are limited to students with IEP, like text-to-speech. So this is both. It does not include any of what we refer to as universal tools that are just on all the time. Does that help?
And after you finish, I want to go back to the slide for accessibility resources.
Sure.
And I'm wondering what that may look like in real time.
Okay, we'll go back to it.
Thanks.
And look at the slide, see if I can understand. Okay, so to follow up, if you start seeing discrepancies between assignment and usage, we don't want to jump to any conclusion. I think that there's lots of questions that districts should ask themselves, right? Were they over assigning resources? Maybe not. Maybe they just weren't providing students with enough access to the practice and training tests in order to learn how to use them so that they would access them. So there's lots of different reasons why you might see that discrepancy. And so we're starting to think about also what are the questions that we would suggest that someone in the field ask themselves. And so we're starting to look at this. We're going to start with just statewide looks. This is something that we want to roll out probably fairly slowly in terms of this. We'll be adding additional resources that we will look at over the years and take some time in terms of determining how to categorize things. Using a resource on one item, is that usage, those types of questions. So we're starting to look at frequencies and we'll build from there. Last, I don't have a slide for this. I did want to share with you, so for each of our assessments that we use to meet federal obligations, we are required to submit our assessment for federal peer review. It is a very technical process that is difficult to achieve full approval, frankly. And so we have submitted some of our assessments through, not all. They have to have been given for a full operational year before we send them. So we have submitted our Smarter Balanced assessments, and we have just recently, for the first time, submitted our California Alternate Assessment for English Language Arts and Math for its first review. And based on its first review, it came back as substantially met. That is a huge kudo. So there are a few pieces of outstanding evidence that we still need to provide to the U.S. Department of Education to get from substantially met to fully met. But receiving a substantially met on our first submission is definitely something that we should be proud of. I don't know of anyone that gets met on their first time, and substantially is a good thing. So we are continuing to work with Kristin and her staff on some of the outstanding pieces of evidence that we need to provide the U.S. Department of Education, but we're in a pretty good spot in terms of those two assessments. So let me go back now to your slide, and so I think your question was in real time, and so could you ask it in
So you were saying that these resources are available to students regardless if they have an IEP or a 504.
Some resources are.
That's where I was saying, like the sign language and text-to-speech, I was wondering what would that look like in real time if a student doesn't have an IEP or 504 and they want to access sign language or text-to-speech. So those two resources are not for students.
Right.
Okay.
So we use an umbrella term called accessibility resources. So under that umbrella term of accessibility resources, we have three categories. One of the categories is accommodations, which are for students with IEP. Another category is designated supports, those for students who have an adult who has identified a need for that resource. And the other is a universal tool. All of those are under the category of accessibility resources, and some of them are available to all students. Sign language is a resource that is embedded within the system by way of videos. So a student with an IEP that needs to have access to sign language would have that turned on in the system, and so when they went to an item, they would have the ability to watch the video with the sign language interpreter.
So I'm just looking at the side panel. So expandability and Zoom 3 times, that will be available to all students?
Zoom 3 is not, no. Expandability is that universal or designated? Yeah, so expandability is just when you look at our, for example, our passages on the screen, they come in 2 panes, like one side and the other of the screen. And so in order to make it easier for a student to read them, some of them like to have access to the full screen when they're reading. And so this allows them to expand that out to the full screen so that they can read that.
I think I'm confused because the top line says we're making sure to ensure every student can access the assessment, and I'm thinking that these on the side means that you want all students to access. That's why it's kind of confusing for me.
So, and we do have we refer to it as a bento box diagram. So those are available on our website that shows the 3 categories of assessment and of accessibility supports, and which ones are available for which students. So we do have that available. We also have short, like 1-minute videos that you can watch with some of these that actually show what they look like in the testing environment for a student. So if you want to see what Zoom 3 times looks like in the testing environment, you can watch a 1-minute video. We have put out a flyer specifically for IEP teams that really showcase the availability of those types of resources to them so that they can be informed when they're making the decisions about which resources they should assign to students.
And that's online, so we can link to that, and Matt can send it out to everybody. Okay.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. April, question?
Good morning. Thank you. This is very informative. I just had a question that there's oftentimes that there are some kiddos that don't have 504s or IEPs that are just not recognized yet that they might need them. Sometimes parents don't want to have their kids labeled, and so they just don't utilize some of these IEPs or 504s. How difficult would it be to have a teacher have access to all of these in the event that they see that a student really needs them? And you know, IEPs sometimes take a while, and sometimes the team doesn't always feel that there's a need. But maybe a teacher may have the ability to research and say, this would be perfect.
So it's often the case where we want to provide students with every resource that we can make available. But research has shown that sometimes that's detrimental to a student, that we need to make sure that we are making really informed decisions about what to put in front of them, because it can actually hinder their performance and make the system more complicated. So we are very deliberate in terms of making this decision about what to designate for an IEP decision versus which ones to make a designated support. We like to put more things in the designated support column if we can, but we do want to make sure it's appropriate. For example, for the most part, we don't believe that there would be students that would benefit from an ASL video if they don't already have an IEP, so we put that in that particular category. It could be distracting for students who don't need it. So we're trying to really balance that distraction hindrance factor with also making sure that everyone has the resources that they actually need.
Thank you, Michelle. Kristin, did you want to respond to that too?
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that that I think it'll help to see the different categories and everything that's in them, because there are a lot in the universal designated categories. But I also would warn us that if a teacher is suspecting that a student needs that high level of accommodation, that's a child find issue. We really want to make sure that that child is assessed and identified to get all the supports and services they need, because we really want folks with special education training to be the ones who are assisting that student in using that higher level of accommodations. And so there may be, I totally hear what you're saying. There may be those situations where they are, but I also hope that as a system, we are looking at that student beyond just testing and saying, I think they might need some accommodations, because all these accommodations really should be happening in the classroom. They shouldn't just be turned on for a test. And so the kids can get the most benefit from them when they're using them every day and they feel comfortable with them. And I think that speaks to your point about there will be times when the kids don't use them. And that may be because at an IEP team, you think this is a great idea. And then in practice, you turn them on and it makes the kid like, I can't look at it like this. And we need to please turn that color off because that makes me mad.
Right, and Kristin, to follow up on that point, we are just starting the process of creating a new video resource that I think is going to be very useful. Last time we were here, we walked you through the ISAP process, and I think that was very informative. But one of the things that we heard back from you, as well as those in the audience that commented, was this concern that they're not engaging in the process early enough to ensure that they're using these during instruction. And so we are putting out an informational video to really hit that point home, that this is not just for assessment. If they're using it for the assessment, they should be using it in the classroom. And to try and tackle the assumption that we've heard some people make that actually providing individuals with access gives them an unfair advantage. And so we really want to try and tackle that misconception also in this video that we're going to do.
Nice. I appreciate you continuing to ask questions because I know we're over time, but if you're okay with a couple more, Summer and then Kimberly.
Just on that same point, is this on? Can you hear me? On that same point, I just wanted to share that when this all started, when SBAC started, and we didn't know how that whole box of just the universal accessibility was going to roll out, I think that it's gone to such great lengths to show that this test really is considering all different types of learning styles. And I think teachers really appreciate that. And I have not heard one say that they wish they had something more available to them. I think the whole global sense of how this assessment is being rolled out to our students is that everyone is trying to find what works best, and that more can be, I agree with you completely, more can be, access to a ruler. Kids just play with the ruler all over the place, sometimes. So I think that as we embarked upon this process, we've come so far in the field to really communicate to teachers that we're giving you everything that we possibly can that we think would be helpful, and not trying to give you too much so that it's a detriment. So I just wanted to give that perspective, that I think it's so valuable to how teachers and students feel about taking this test.
Great. Thank you, Summer. Kimberly?
Just a quick clarification. You are tracking designated supports and accommodations, but not the universal. And I'm just wondering if, in the spirit of universal design, and as we move forward and we have the flexibility and we're trying to be nimble with the design of this test, if it would be useful to track how students are accessing, because I think at that universal level, you're really gathering data on what all students may choose to use. And that may be useful information moving forward if you see that something is being utilized a lot. Is that an expansion opportunity down the road, and expanding or differentiating that tool even more?
Happy to take that back. We probably won't do that right away. We're already, the magnitude of the data, as you can imagine, if you're looking at every single item and every single student and what did they access, is already big data to the 10th degree. And so I can see us as having some conversations on if there are any that are of really particular interest that we want to investigate, but maybe not all.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Kimberly. Michelle, did you want to share?
Yeah, I did want to share a quick little story. So I have a 19-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 10-year-old. They've all gone through the same elementary school. So going to the point of incentivizing science instruction, I can just say I've seen it. My two older children didn't have any meaningful science instruction. And they had good instruction, but they didn't have any meaningful science instruction in elementary school. My youngest, from 3rd grade, very meaningful. My youngest was diagnosed when she was a toddler with a developmental delay and also expressive receptive language disorder. So she had her own challenges coming into school. But for whatever reason, science has been her thing. And so a couple days ago, she came home with quite a good grade on a science project, and she told me, "Mom, I'm a science girl." And I was so thrilled because she said she's also a fashion girl. I'll just put it out there. I'm a fashion girl and a science girl. But I just thought about where she came from, and without that access to the kinds of deeper hands-on kind of science that they're doing now, she wouldn't have had that concept for herself. So I just want you to take that back as a big positive for me. The test is great. I'm happy with the universal tools. How she does on it is not nearly as important to me as how she feels about herself right now. So thank you.
Nice. Well, thank you, Michelle. Appreciate you coming down. And similar to the discussion we had yesterday after the accountability presentation, we started this with Summer being our representative with assessment. Thank you for that, Summer. But saying thank you so much for adding accommodations and modifications into the test. But now to see the level of sophistication of those resources, we definitely appreciate the work that you've led in that area. So thank you for that. Okay, commissioners, we're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute break and then come back. Shiloh, I saw you come down. Thank you for coming down. I'm sorry we're a little bit off on time. And so if you don't mind, we'll take a quick 10-minute break, come back, and jump into item number 12. Number 11, sorry. Yeah, thank you. All right, welcome back, commissioners. Thank you for honoring that quick break. Definitely appreciate it. We are now moving through our agenda, day 2. We are on item number 11. So I want to welcome Shiloh down from our education. She's our wow, I'm going to let you say your title, Shiloh, but welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Shiloh Duncan-Besserill. I'm the data administrator for special education in California. And so that role has a couple of different elements to it. First of all, I'm in charge of collecting and reporting all data for students with disabilities, not just data that exists in our special education information system, but also in our student information system, CalPADS. And I'm also responsible for reporting all of the data to the U.S. Department of Education and for our state public reporting. So I'm here today to talk to you on my annual discussion about the annual performance report, which is always really exciting for me, but probably less for you all. But you guys have coffee, so you're probably in good shape. And it's early. But usually if I'm at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's sort of the doldrums. Sort of to give you a little bit of perspective about the annual performance report, and I noticed, I want to make sure it was pulled up. You all have in your, I believe in your handouts, you have this one-page document, so that will help you. I will not be going through every indicator, but we can reference other indicators that I don't highlight in this presentation. Every year we are required under IDEA to submit an annual performance report on specific indicators identified by the U.S. Department of Education to the U.S. Department of Education every year for the previous year. So most of the data I'm going to be talking about today is coming from your 17-18 school year. To kind of give you some idea of the things that we're talking about in our division and how that relates, you'll see a lot of connections between our priorities, which is preschool inclusion, mapping to employment, and reading literacy and communicative competency. You'll see those mapping to some of the data you'll see. I wanted to sort of start with grounding everyone in what students with disabilities look like in California and where they fall in different populations. I know that there's a number of new commissioners, and I come and say this every year, and I just kind of wanted to highlight this. In the past, I have shown you a set of what's called Pac-Man charts. They're like 3 sets of pie charts. Unfortunately, because we have changed some of our requirements under 508, I don't have those graphical charts anymore, but this is sort of a an accessible version of those pie charts, and I just wanted to make sure that you knew that's what that was. But one of the questions we often get is, how do students with disabilities overlap with the LCFF student groups? And so this chart here shows you that they're actually part of each one of those student groups. And so I want to start with letting you know the percentage of students with disabilities in all of our populations throughout the state is 11.2%. So on average, most districts will find themselves about 11% students with disabilities. But when you look at the percentages of their representation in the different LCFF student groups, you'll notice that that percentage is larger. So for example, for students who are free and reduced price meals, that percentage is 13%, so 2% greater than the 11%. For students who are foster youth, that percentage is 27%, so more than double. And for English language learners, it is 17%, so about 6% higher. So we see a larger representation in those student groups than we would see in the greater population for our students with disabilities. And I think that's important to think about as we're moving through and talking about the accountability system and how we're going to be aligning to that accountability system. Another thing that people often ask me is like, how are they represented, and how are students with disability represented in other student groups? Well, 71% of our students are in one of those student groups. So they're free and reduced price meal eligible, they're English language learners, or they are foster youth. And some of them are all of those groups. And so 71% of our students with disabilities are in one of those groups. So I think that's always important to kind of keep in mind. Those students are our students. They're all students. One thing I often say, some changes we're making in our data systems, because we have one student that sits in our classroom and we have to tell the story of those students. And so this helps to tell that when we're talking about those LCFF student groups. I always like to bring this chart too. It's a kind of a heavy numbery chart, but if you scroll all the way to the bottom where it says percent of all students, you'll notice year after year we've seen an increase in the number of students with disabilities and their percent within that population. And so one of the things that's pretty interesting is over time, the student population in California has remained relatively flat. What we see, though, is we see every year a growth in the number of students with disabilities who are identified. And that has pretty much held true. And in fact, we've seen a pretty significant growth over the last 3 years of about about 20,000 a year. So that's a big change for us that we've seen. Usually we would see between 5,000 and 10,000 students increase. We're seeing in the last 2 years about 20,000 each per year. So just something to keep in mind, and that you can see in the percentage, you'll see that growth happening there as well. People often ask me, how does the breakdown of students with disabilities by disability look like? And this is kind of what we look at. This is nothing new. So for those of you who are new commissioners, you'll see this breakdown is pretty much standard. I have in the past showed over time these disabilities. I don't have that chart with me today, but I'm happy to share it with the commissioners at any time if they're interested in it. But what you'll see is most of our students, about 38%, have a specific learning disability, followed by speech and language and autism. Commissioners have questions.
Go ahead, April.
Yes.
I know you said you didn't have this slide, but I'm just curious, is there any one area that you recall that's had significant movement or change in patterns?
So what we typically see is over the past 15 years, we've seen an increase in autism and a decrease in specific learning disability. So that's what you would typically see.
You took one of my questions. The other question is, if you have, for example, a child with, let's say, Down syndrome and autism, which would also have some speech and language impairments, would they all be listed there, or would it be only one specific area?
So the way that we collect the data is we identify a student's primary disability and their secondary disability. This only represents the student's primary disability. Now, students may also have multiple disabilities. Now, those are disabilities that are co-committant. So that means that you can't consider one without the other. And so that is represented on here. But students who have two disabilities or who have a primary and a secondary disability, only their primary disability is represented here.
Shiloh?
Do we have another question? Okay. So the number, this is also sort of a percent change. This kind of goes into what some people were asking. This is 0506% change, and so that's that number. I used to have a line graph that showed this. I don't have the line graph anymore because it's the pictures are hard to make that accessible. So that's what we have here. And so this goes to the question that you had, Commissioner Tostin, where we asked about autism. You could see in 0506, the percentage was at 5%, and now it's at 14%. So almost tripling that amount. And also you'll see the percent of change. We see a 49% change in some of the deaf blindness, the orthopedic impairment. Those are where we've seen the largest decreases. We often get questions, especially since we're talking about disproportionality, and I will talk about disproportionality later, about students with disability by ethnicity. And this typically, you will see the percent, I identified all students and then also students with disabilities. And you'll see we do have a pretty close alignment, although we do identify more African American students with disabilities, and then we also identify fewer Asian American students with disabilities. So just something to keep in mind. Questions? Keep going. Anyone has any questions, just shout them out. I know you guys aren't shy, so. I also like to talk about students with disabilities who are in preschool, because it's a little bit of a different population, and this is our students who are 3 to 5. So keeping in mind that when we're talking about preschools under IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, they identify preschool students as ages 3 to 5, not pre-K before kindergarten. So you'll have 5-year-olds who are in kindergarten programs, and they would still be considered preschoolers under the IDEA. So this includes all students of 3 to 5, and there's no surprise, the most common disability we identify is students with speech and language impairment. And then also by disability, again, so I don't have the general education population identified here, and there's a reason for that. We don't have universal pre-K here in California, and so we don't have that general population comparison group to make. And so I only have the students with disabilities numbers here and their percentages. But for the most part, we're identifying, kind of the very similar rates that we would see in the 6 to 22 population. Okay, now we get to the fun stuff. I said before, we're required to submit the annual performance report to the U.S. Department of Education annually. It's actually a requirement in law. If anyone's really interested, I finally learned the actual citation. The State Board of Education must approve it, and also the ACSE must also provide its approval. It has 17 indicators today. What you'll see on your document here, and I will be highlighting a few of them, are 16 indicators. The 17th indicator is the State Systemic Improvement Plan. And we'll come back, I think, in February and talk a little bit more about that. It's sort of its own thing. There's performance indicators, compliance indicators, and then there's one indicator that counts for both. Targets that are, indicators that are compliance indicators have a percentage of either 0 or 100%. So there's no leeway there. And then targets for performance indicators are currently, we have our stakeholder group set them, and it's approved by the commission here and also the State Board of Education. We currently have targets from 13-14 through 18-19. So after this year, so when I present to you next year, next October, you will see that's the last year that we have targets for. We're waiting for the U.S. Department of Education to publish what the annual performance report will look like going from 19-20 and beyond. We're hoping that will come very soon, because if the U.S. Department of Education decides to make significant changes to the indicators starting in 2019-20, we need to know that pretty quickly. For those of you who are unaware, and for those of you who are new, we have traditionally collected special education data inside a system called the California Special Education Management Information System, CASEMIS. And it has been around since 1987, maybe even before that. It is quite old and is in time for replacement. And so we are closing that data collection, and we will be collecting all data for students with disabilities inside the student information systems and the state longitudinal data system, CalPADS. And that will start in 2019-20. The The reason I bring that up is because if the U.S. Department of Education decides to make significant changes to how we are needing to collect and report that data, we need to know that really quickly, because CalPADS doesn't make quick changes. And so we'll have to figure out what that looks like. So we may be coming back to you in relatively short order to explain to you if they decide to publish new requirements under the annual performance report, to get your input, because we will need to provide comment as a state about what that would look like for us. So we do collect some of the data for the annual performance report from CalPADS. That's mostly the suspension data and the graduation data. Oh, and the assessment data. I'll just forget that one. And then the rest of the data mostly comes from the CASEMA system. Our Office of Administrative Hearings collects our due process and mediation data. So you see that represented on this document. Currently, we're talking about school years 17-18. There are 3 indicators that are lag year, and they're required by the U.S. Department of Education to be lag year. And so for those indicators, we'll be talking about 16-17 data. So I like to sort of set up this presentation in a couple ways. I start the boring stuff first, which is the compliance stuff, and then we get, even though disproportionality is not boring, I will talk about that. But the sort of the compliance-y stuff, we always tend to be really close on a lot of the compliance indicators. This year is no different. One of the things I'm actually really happy to report, if you remember last year, we had a drop in the number of students who were transitioning from the Part C, which is our infant program, to the Part B on a time. We are now sort of having a course correction on that, and we are seeing an increase in students who are making that timely transition. So I'm actually really happy to talk about that. And so last year we were at 94%, and the year before I think we were at 86%. And so what we're seeing now is that correction happening in the right direction. I think the cause for that is that we worked really closely with the Department of Developmental Services and with the regional centers and the districts to try and make those transitions happen more successfully. So we didn't meet the target, and we don't typically meet any of the 100% targets just because it's a big state. We have lots of students, and sometimes things happen. But we are seeing improvement, which is exciting. So I'm going to talk about disproportionality. I was in Boston last week, and I don't know if any of you read in Ed Week that the U.S. Department of Education has signaled that they are intending to revise those regulations once again. And so in 2016, Ed changed the regulations for significant disproportionality. The way it used to happen for disproportionality is that states could choose any way that they thought was appropriate to calculate disproportionality. And so we had a methodology that we used, and we were allowed to set our minimum N sizes and minimum cell sizes and our thresholds. The U.S. Department of Education changed that requirement and required that all states use the risk ratio for all calculations, and also changed the number of calculations states had to make. One of the problems with the risk ratio, and I think I've talked about it before here, is that it is very sensitive to error. So if you have 1 or 2 students, it can make a big difference. Yes?
Can you just clarify, Shiloh, the risk ratio is set by the feds. It is not set here.
Yeah, so the requirement to use the risk ratio, which is the methodology that we use, is required by the regulation, by the feds.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Chose that number, correct? There was a range. Did we choose that?
So yes, I'm getting there. Yes, so we had to use the risk ratio, but we were allowed to set both the minimum N size, the cell size, and the threshold, but it had to be approved by the U.S. Department of Education. So that came out typically in December 2016. Last year, we were supposed to implement fully those regulations this year. The U.S. Department of Education delayed the implementation of those regulations to 2020. However, we decided to kind of begin to go forward with those changes. Last week, Ed signaled that they will be coming out with a new proposed rulemaking. So for those of you who are not familiar, the new proposed rulemaking means they're intending to change the regulation. It's not like we're going to delay it, we're going to stop it, we're going to do something else. That is an intent for them to change. So the way that works is that they will come out publicly with what they think they will change, it will require a 70-day comment period, at which time they will need to respond to all comments, and then they will publish the regulation. So my guess is around this time next year, we will have some idea of what the regulation might look like. Yes, yes. So I don't have any news other than sort of scuttlebutt beyond that. There is some signaling that it might be less restrictive or less onerous on states. One of the problems the states had is many states will said, you know, the alternate risk ratio is so sensitive to error, we're now identifying lots of districts, and it may not be appropriate. It may be because they have one student, or they have very few students, or they have a really strange population, and it's causing this thing that's just not the right fit for disproportionality. We've also had concerns on our end around small districts around disproportionality. Okay, I'll get to that part. Because what happens is we have small school districts, and typically if they're so small that we are concerned about error, we would exclude them. We couldn't do that under this new regulation. We had to use something called the alternate risk ratio, which said, okay, you'd have to take that small student population and compare them to the entire state. Well, that didn't help those districts because it wasn't the same. And this was also affected pretty heavily charters. And so we went from having a couple hundred districts identified as being disproportionate to about 800. And then once we move forward with significant disproportionality. So stay tuned. We are going to continue as if there's no changes happening to the regulations right now. We just think that's the right thing to do. Here's the definition. So we have a disproportionality definition and significant disproportionality. What we are intending to do is we use the same calculation for both disproportionality and significant disproportionality. One is a 1-year calculation. The significant disproportionality is a 3-year calculation. So you will have to have been disproportionate for 3 years to become significantly disproportionate. We think that this is a good practice because we're identifying a lot of districts who weren't previously identified as being significantly disproportionate. And so then they have time to go, okay, we're in year 1, what things can we change in order to make sure that we're not significantly disproportionate?
And when you're saying districts, you're meaning LEAs, so it includes charter schools.
Yeah, it will include charter schools, so local education agencies. The reason that I can, oh yeah, go ahead.
Going back to what you were saying about Ed is signaling they may change, is there anything that they have published that we can begin sharing with the field in our day jobs? Because sometimes or last time it felt like, oh, what's CDE doing, when it had been something that the feds had been working on for a while?
So again, I don't have anything. Basically, they published a 2-sentence piece in their Federal Registers that says, hey, this is coming, we're going to make changes. What I will tell you, though, is when they do a new proposed rulemaking, that tends to be a significant change. So beyond that, my indications is potentially that given this administration, it probably will provide more flexibility or some kind of flexibility. For us, the thing that when I look at this, I feel like this is a really important issue. So I don't know if we would want to change so much. Like, we're already out there. We've already looked at the data. I've been running models for 3 years. We're going to just move forward for what's best for our students and for the state. And if that means continuing what we're continuing, then we will do that.
And we'll take those cues from the policymakers, and as you know, over the next year, we'll take that from the field as well, all that input.
But just be aware that that is coming out. I will tell you, with significant disproportionality, there's a fiscal impact too, right? So if you have, if you become significantly disproportionate, you have to set aside 15% of your IDA funds and use it on a coordinated early intervening services plan. One of the nice things about the regulation change that happened in 2016 was that they provided a little bit more flexibility in that funding. So you could use it for students with or without disabilities. You could use it for pre-K students. So that was kind of a nice thing for LEAs. Okay, so this is kind of the process that we would use for year 1. If you're disproportionate, you would sort of do a root cause. There's a compliance element to it. Disproportionality year 2, hoping that you change practices. But if you're still disproportionate in year 3, then you become significantly disproportionate. That's sort of the intention of how it would work. And I think we would probably advocate for something similar to this. This seems to work well for us. So last year, we identified 677 local education agencies that have with at least one area of disproportionality. One of the things about the regulation which was really interesting was that they expanded the number of categories that existed. So it used to be just 3 categories. Now it's expanded, I believe, to 9 categories, and so it provides more instances where a district could find themselves disproportionate. Okay, now on to performance indicators. I just want to make sure I'm doing good in time.
Yep, doing great.
So here's the thing that you'll see is that we have seen some changes in the data. I cannot speculate as to why that might be. I know you might have questions to that. I often say that the data is the what, it's not the why. And so we haven't really jumped into what the why might be on why we're seeing some changes in this data. But you will see some changes, and you'll see it in your document below. This is continued. Again, this is just a copy of what you have in your hand, but I like to pull it up so you can see it. One thing that I think we're happy to report is that we saw a decrease in the dropout rate. Keep in mind, this is a 1-year dropout rate that we use for students with disabilities. And so for 16-17, remember this is lag year data, for 16-17, we dropped from 13.7% to 11.6%, so that's a drop of 2.39%. The target is 11.72%, so we are actually meeting the target in dropout, and we did not meet it last year. Statewide assessments, the target is 95% of students with disabilities would be participating, and that 14.9 is our ELA target, and 12.6 is our math target. People often ask me, those seems like very low targets, and that is correct in that they were set several years ago when we started the new assessment, and we have to use a baseline. So the baseline would be the first year that we had assessment data, and then we build our targets onto that. So you'll see that targets increase over time, but we had to start at where we were at the first year we had the CASP data. And so for this year, we did not meet our participation target for both math and ELA. I will tell you, we're still working a little bit on this data. We may see some changes as we are pulling the data in and working on it. So there's been some updates to the assessment data. So this may change, but as it stands right now, we're not meeting the participation targets. I was recently at a meeting last week in Boston about the 1% convening. Students who take the alternate assessment are included in this participation percent. We currently do meet the 1% requirement in ESSA, just barely. So one of the things that we've talked about is looking at districts who are not meeting the 1% target and sort of working with them to making sure that they're identifying students appropriately for the alternate assessment. And also looking at districts who are not meeting their 95% participation rate to identify what we can do to improve that. One thing to note is we did start seeing decreases in participation rate when we started to see more parent opt-outs. And so parent opt-outs cannot be included in the participation rate. Only medical opt-outs are included as in the participation rate. Assessment proficiency, I wanted to show sort of the math and ELA targets side by side from last year. What you will see is that we are seeing a decrease in the number of students who are becoming proficient in some areas. And we're seeing drops in most of the categories. Again, I cannot explain why this might be. It's something we're going to be looking at over the next year or so to try and identify what the cause of that is, but that's what we're seeing right now. So just to kind of keep that in mind. I did want to point out, a lot of people say, wait a second, your high school districts, that percentage is very low. It is very low, but keep in mind that only includes students that's only 11th grade students, right? Because only 11th grade students take that assessment. Another area that's we've seen a drop is in our preschool least restrictive environment. So we saw a 7% drop in the students who are with disabilities who are receiving their services in a regular early childhood program. So we've been working to figure out what might that be. Again, I don't have a reason why, and And if you all have some wonderful ideas of what we'd be looking at, I would be happy to do that. But we are seeing fewer students who are receiving services in the in a regular early childhood program. And we're seeing more students who are being served in separate special education classes, schools, or facilities. Again, this is ages 3 through 5. And then just to kind of highlight some things that we are actually doing better at is our post-secondary outcomes. We are seeing increases in all of these categories. One of the things we're talking about is how we increase our response rate around this. We have seen an increase in the response rate over time. We've really been encouraging LEAs to track students after they leave, to identify where they might be going, and not use the traditional paper survey that we send to their house, but using things like social media access, email, those kinds of things. So, hey, asking them on Facebook, what are you doing? Or linking them to an electronic survey might be a more effective way. And we have seen an increase in the response rate, but we are kind of thinking about how can we increase the response rate. And we've been talking with some of our partners and in other agencies about trying to match some of our data. So that might be the next step to really increase the response rate. So something to kind of keep in mind as we move forward. But we are seeing increases in both the response rate and then the outcomes in this indicator. So I wanted to bring this out because some of the things that you might have been hearing and talking about is what's next? What's happening now? Like, you're seeing the data. What are we doing in the division? So as you know, the dashboard comes out I think it's going to come out in the first week of December. I don't know if you had Cindy here yesterday or if she's coming. I don't want to be like her previewer. But that's the intention, is for it to come out in December. In the past, what's happened is what we have done, all of our monitoring and support activities kind of peppered throughout the school year. We are actually intending to notify districts about all of their monitoring activities and opportunities for technical assistance along with the dashboard. What we identified last year was people would be identified for the dashboard, and then they'd go and look for their APR data, and it was out of date, or they didn't have it, or we hadn't had it out yet. And so we decided my poor staff members are kind of dying a little bit because we're decided to smush 10 months of work into 4. And so we're doing all the analysis for all of the data right now, and it will all be 17-18 data. So when districts and LEAs receive their all districts receive an annual performance report for their own LEA. When they receive those, it'll be all 17-18 data, and they will be able to work through all their dashboard data and their special education data to identify what their needs might be, and they'll also be identified for what activities they will be participating in. So that's actually a good thing. We're aligning all of the timelines so people don't feel like, okay, we get hit over here, and then we get something over here, and then what's this? And they're taking their disproportionality letter to their LCAP meetings. They're like, is this the same thing? So we're trying to bring everything together so it seems easier for districts and LEAs. Oh, and that's all I had, so I'm happy to take your questions.
Fantastic. Thank you for bringing the info. And thanks to you and to your team for, crunching the data so that LEAs have relevant information to be analyzing the performance of their students and their work. Commissioners, what questions do you have? It's a lot of information. Yeah, go ahead, David.
More of a curiosity. You receive all of the case mix data from the SELPAs, and we do go through the duplication process. I'm wondering, is there any other just screening for data that might be out of whack? Someone transposed their LRE numbers. I know there's thousands of cells of data. I was just curious.
So here's one thing that we've identified that I think is important as you're moving forward is this year we identified some concerns we had around suspension data. And so as LEAs are looking at that data, I would strongly encourage them to look closer at the suspension data. We identified a number of districts who had reported chronic absenteeism for a student that indicated this student was absent because they had a suspension or expulsion, but then we couldn't find a suspension record for them. And so what happens is they're reported as being absent, so they probably weren't at school, for suspension or expulsion, but we have no record for them. So they're not included in any of our analysis around suspension and expulsion. So we're working with districts to identify what the cause of that is. We also identified in some districts, not districts, but some schools that did not report suspension data last year at all. And so we've been working with them to sort of address those issues. So when we identify those, we actually work with those schools and districts, or schools and LEAs specifically. But that's something I would highlight, is looking at the suspension data closely to making sure that it's really accurate, because it's a high stakes calculation in both disproportionality and the dashboard.
But maybe Shiloh can talk also a little bit about, we have a number of activities after we receive the data that the data goes through in order to determine if there are things that are inconsistent. So you can't be this with this or this without this. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about, we've gotten a lot more savvy on things that couldn't be possible, letting that happen, and I think it's kind of what you're speaking to.
Yeah. So one of the things we've always gone through a set process for identifying. Obviously, if you work with CaseMIS at all, or if you've ever seen it, you send. It's sort of like I call it like a Scantron, like a voting. You go through the voting machine, it makes sure all the dots are in the right. So that's what CaseMIS does. You take your data, you extract it from your electronic IEP system, and then you you check and make sure, did you put dates where dates were supposed to be? Do you have all the correct sort of the fields correct, and then also validate some of the data. It says, hey, we are identifying that this student hasn't had an IEP in the last year. So it'll give you a list of those kinds of errors and warnings, and you have to correct them before you submit or ensure that they're accurate. So we do that process. We do an unduplication process, which was something you talked about, which is where we look and make sure that the students are only represented in one district in SELPA, or LEA and SELPA. And so we're putting those together and seeing where that happens. And we report back to the SELPAs and say, hey, these students are reported in 2 different LEAs. Can you correct that? And then we also do kind of what I was talking about with the suspension, where we actually cross-validate data across different submissions. So we'll compare CaseMIS to CalPADS. We'll compare different fields in CaseMIS, for example. So we sometimes identify that the student's residential status is living with their parents, but their school status is that they're in an incarcerated facility. It's like, well, you can't have both those things. So looking at that cross-validation and then working with the districts where we identify that to correct those errors. So that's what we're doing. The biggest change that we're making probably over the next 2 years that you're going to hear a lot from LEAs is the turning off of CaseMIS, sort of shuttering it and moving into CalPADS. And the reason for that is because we wanted to have more consistent data. What happens at districts and LEAs is that they have these they have an electronic IEP system, which tracks everything that happens with a student with a disability, and then they also have a student information system. And the student information system data came to CalPADS, and the electronic IEP data came to CaseMIS. And they weren't talking at the top, and they weren't talking at the bottom. And so we've sort of changed that. So CaseMIS will go away, and then all the data would be submitted up to CalPADS, so we can validate things like race, ethnicity, name, SSID, things like that. I mean, we often get things like, every once in a while we'll get an SSID that's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We're like, got to go back and try again. And so it will sort of catch a lot of those things prior to submission.
And again, that is the way, once with those things are identified, we circle back with the districts and are having individual conversations about each individual student that's happening with, to ensure that inconsistency is made consistent. Yeah. So we're constantly trying to improve that and making sure that we're already clear that our data is reliable and valid because of the current checks that we have on the system. We're just continuing to optimize it. And I think it'll make it more clear for everyone who's involved with data at the LEA level and even the school site level to have one system and one set of criteria everyone's operating from. It just makes good sense.
So one of the things that we identified is helping LEAs have those internal conversations between the 2 departments, like between special education and the student information system, like the CalPADS coordinator. So we're developing some tools and a toolkit for LEAs to use to create what's typically called as data governance, but every time I say that, when I'm at a school or an LEA, they kind of go, ooh. So more data integration. So how do we integrate the data? How do we have folks have conversations about the data at the local level? So we're coming out with a number of tools to help LEAs with that process.
Nice. Summer, do you have a question?
I have two. The first one is around the suspensions piece. So I don't know if this is your division or part of the accountability, but maybe some conversations could take place. So when I look at the data just from my school, students with disabilities and suspensions, it's an area for me to watch, right? And I think I reflect back because we've tried everything under the sun to avoid, suspensions for students with disabilities, but occasionally you're in the beginning process with families and there just can be behavior and situations that take place that you really can't avoid it. So I don't know where the thresholds lie for when you get into, orange or red or yellow or whatever your color is. But I'm wondering if maybe and I talked about it last meeting too, I'm wondering if maybe there needs to be some look at where those numbers lie in the understanding that, no one thinks any child gets suspended in elementary school, but they do. And often they can be students with disabilities that we're trying desperately to provide the right kind of services and placement, but it takes time because you're working with a family that's new into understanding what the needs of their child are in the school setting. So that's just my thought is because I don't know where those lines are drawn or how you get to be one color, what number breaks it down. But since that's a new piece, maybe we could look at that in the elementary school setting. And the second comment was I noticed that I think Michelle presented to us that they had developed a really nice, friendly parent accessibility kind of frequently asked questions page. And I haven't seen it personally roll out, but I think that it was so nicely done that if I as a principal sent that out to all of my parents of students with disabilities, I bet you it would alleviate a lot of their concern about some of these assessments, so we might get higher participation. Because sometimes you just get I don't want my child doing it. And if I had a little conversation with a friendly kind of tool to show them that it's a great thing. Those were just my two comments.
Great. Thank you, Summer. It's almost like you are warming us up for our breakout activity. But we do have an opportunity after Shiloh's presentation to identify what are some recommendations or what is some additional information or additional data we need to be thinking about and how are we thinking about it to address questions just like the one you brought up around suspension. So thank you. Yes, Stephen.
One technical question. I'm reading the students with disability by ethnicity, which was on your slide 8. Yeah. And I'm just trying to understand with Hispanic and Latino students, the number that are students with disability are the over 400,000. But the issue around the percentage that moves into then all students, is that the percentage that we have 56% of all students are Hispanic students with disability? I'm trying to understand your graph.
Okay, I'm sorry. Again, this is part of having to change the graphs to make it more accessible. We're still learning and trying to maximize the way it looks. So the 56.76% is the total. That's the percent of that 439,000 students who are Hispanic. And then the 54% is 54% of the 3 million students are Hispanic.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And that tracks with the disproportionate number that you saw in the other area as well. Yeah. On the other slide.
Yeah. I mean, if you kind of go a little bit down, you'll see where it says African American, you'll see 8% of students of that of all students. Mm-hmm. It's really 8% of the 776,000. That is 8% of that, 62,000 students, versus 5% of the 6 million, which is 340,000. So we'll find a way to make that a little bit better. I'm a picture person, so these are hard for me too. I totally understand. I've in the past shown it in pie charts, which is a little bit easier.
Great. Thank you, Shiloh. Other questions? Commissioners? Okay. So, Shiloh, thank you. I know that you do have another meeting, but you are welcome to hang out because we do have an activity. And if you're not here, that's okay. We're going to get the information to you. but definitely appreciate you bringing us info.
Thank you. Thank you, commissioners. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, commissioners, now that you have the information, hopefully you all had a chance to read the data, the executive summary of the APR last year's report, the measurement table that's used for each indicator, and the federal statute that talks about each state's obligation to report data. Hopefully you have all that. For members of the public, that is on the back table for you. Our job now is to think about what additional data do you need? And so if you look at that list of 14 indicators, which I appreciated Shiloh pointing out that it's a balance of performance and compliance, what additional information do we need in order to tell the story? Or what additional information do we want in order to have a greater understanding as we're trying to grapple with the outcomes that she presented to us? And then what areas, if we have recommendations as a commission, what areas would you like the state to be focusing on or putting some extra attention into and reporting back to us? So we're going to break up into two groups in order to come up with answers to these two areas. We'll have one group. Yes, ma'am. Shiloh, welcome back to the podium.
I'm sorry, but in order to take the APR to the board, we need to vote for approval.
That was such a gentle reminder for me. Yes,
Sorry.
Thank you. So, yes, and Shiloh at the beginning of her presentation said that she needed commission approval in order to move that forward. So I would love to hear a motion that, let's see, are we approving, Shiloh, Matt, help me with the language. Are we approving the report as you have presented it?
Great. You're recommending that we take it on to the board to send on to the U.S. Department of Education.
Perfect. So we need a motion that approves the information to go to the state board and then forwarded to the U.S. Department of Ed. So do I hear a motion?
So moved. Or second.
Okay.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we're going to approve this report and send it to the Board of Education.
Second.
Moved by Michelle, seconded by David. All in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. Do I have any noes? Sorry. Any abstentions? Do I have discussion, questions? Do I have any public comment on this motion? Okay, so that passes unanimously. Okay, thank you. That passes unanimously, thank you. And then before we break, Matt, do we have any public comment on this item overall? Okay, great, thank you. Just want to make sure we give the opportunity. So commissioners, we're going to go ahead and break into two groups. You may self-select here or in the media room. Your charge is to look at the two questions that I posed. What additional questions or information regarding the data provided in item 11 would be helpful for a greater understanding? So as you think about those 14 indicators, what additional information do you need in order to understand or make some determinations? And then number two, based on your observations of the data provided, what areas would you like the state to place additional focus on? Or what information would you like Shiloh to be bringing back to us regularly? Or in February? So let's go ahead and break. We're going to meet back here at 11. Sorry, hold on one second. We're going to meet back here at 11:45. And we'll ask one person from each of the two groups to report out discussions that you had within your group. Any questions? Okay, let's go ahead and break. Like I said, one group here in the main room, one group in the side room. Encourage the public to engage with us. Thanks for being here, and there's handouts with the same information on the back table. All right, thanks everybody. Welcome back, commissioners. Thank you so much for your time, your engaging conversation. Looking forward to hearing from each group. So, love to start us off. Again, really appreciate the commitment that we've heard from all of the presenters that we have had on making sure that we are truly representing all kids and how we're approaching the work, how we are committed to this continuous improvement and constantly looking at the data, constantly improving, constantly having discussions. And so just appreciate the department's willingness to hear our feedback and partnering on that. So let me open it up first. We asked you to do two things, to go back, break into groups, look at what additional information you may want the department to be reporting out to us. And are there ways that the information could be disaggregated to better interpret what outcomes we're seeing? So love to hear feedback from groups. Do I have a group that is willing to start us off? Great, Kimberly, thank you.
Well, our group, first, this was a good exercise to go through to refamiliarize ourselves with all of the indicators and what we think they're telling us and what we want to know more from them. We concentrated on two indicators, grad rate, and then indicator 5, which is our educational environment. But in indicator 1, which was our grad rate, we'd like to see that disaggregated to include certificate of completion as we're moving down that conversation so that all students are reflected in that data. We also would like to see information around inclusive opportunities and the impact or lack of impact, we don't know if there's a correlation there, on dropout. So are our students who are more fully included or in an inclusive opportunity, and maybe there's a time element in that, is there a correlative factor to graduation, certificate of completion, and or dropout rate? And then looking at our dropout data, do we know the concentration of, I don't even know how to word this, of where they are coming from, what placement setting maybe holds the greatest concentration of dropouts? I think that's an important piece of information with the changes and the shifts that we have seen, and that if students are more successful in an alternative setting in graduation, what is being provided at that alternative setting that could be provided in a comprehensive site so that students don't have to leave that site in order to graduate. I think those are all conversations that would be generated from that data. Indicator 5 was really a language, wordsmithing a bit to change the language to reflect general education instead of the word regular education throughout. Right.
Everything we're doing today is
Yes.
what we're federally reporting.
Right.
So we can definitely report things in other ways here,
Right.
but we're still using that language, and we will. But just as a sidebar, a note coming from you all, if that's something you feel strongly about, would be a great time to let the feds know,
Right.
OSEP know that you feel that way.
That might be something that we can ask for, huh? Okay. All right. And then just some information that we would like we think maybe outside of the indicators, because we know this is federally driven, but maybe from our state data bank is, given the emphasis on mental health, can we get data regarding looking at ERMs versus just DIS services that are provided, or how those are defined and offered on IEPs? Do we have exit rates from those services, or showing anything that can indicate a rate of improvement? Can we look at length of stay in residential or separate school placements? And then can we get a clarification on definition of what constitutes separate school? So.
Nicely done, Kimberly. Thank you. And I think we've captured those recommendations, so definitely happy to pass those on to the department. Thank you. All right, who do I have from the second group? Michelle, thank you.
So I'm going to ask my team members to chime in because I was trying to keep up. It was a challenge for me. Okay, so we touched base on state assessments first. There's a lot of question about opting out and why that's happening, and if there's a way to analyze it, like particularly if it's coming from elementary or secondary, and we did discuss that on the district level, that data is available, but we can't necessarily see it in this kind of presentation, and it might be interesting to do so. Also, in terms of our students meeting the criteria on the state tests, there's no way for us to be able to show improvement versus meeting a set criteria. And not only for individual students, but also for everybody. It's important to see growth, not necessarily just meeting the benchmark. Doesn't mean you need to remove the benchmark, just maybe add another one that indicates growth. There was a lot of discussion about preschool, so I'm going to defer to Christina after I do my best because she seems to have quite a bit of knowledge. But the data on students who are in preschool and in segregated settings seems to be tweaked and a little bit skewed by the fact that we don't have universal preschool here. So we don't have the same kind of large pot of children that you get in K through 12, right? So a lot of times students who have disabilities are offered that segregated setting as part of an IEP, and there's no integrated setting offered. There was information about new or recent monies to increase that in integrated settings, and there's not a lot of accountability for holding schools to whether students are actively accessing that. So I'm going to jump over to you, Christina.
I'm just going to add that in the administration's increase of funds, that the intent was to bring in more students with disabilities into the state preschool system. And as of now, there is no data to show whether students with disabilities are being integrated into the state's preschool system. So we want to capture that data for one, and then we also want to drill down and see if there are children in the state preschool or early start schools. I'm probably saying that wrong. Head Start schools. Are they children that are defined as mild, moderate, or severe, so that we can see who are the children that are being offered the opportunity in the integrated preschool systems?
Okay, so jumping, I have a couple more things. We talked for a while about the grad rate and the fact that there's no 5-year cohort involved, and obviously we've said it many times here, that's a contradiction for the federal government. They have a federal law that requires that we give access to the age of 22 or a diploma, whichever comes first, and then they penalize people for not, having them finish in 4 years. So that's a problem. And then we also discussed the alternative diploma. If there's a way to make that meaningful and to make sure that we're gauging its utility in some way, how can we show that and how can we collect data on that? Of course, we don't have that yet, but that's our target. And then finally, we spent quite a bit of time on transition. There's just not enough transition planning happening, not just high school to post-secondary, which is extremely important, and we would love to see it be required that there's a regional rep, a DOR rep, or even a DSPS rep from a community college present to be able to support, but also when you're looking at transition from preschool to elementary, elementary to mid to high school, that there's more school-to-school collaboration and presence, and that those meetings are required in some way to ensure that that transition is as smooth as possible. So it's amazing the small bits of information that get dropped that can create a big problem down the line. So that's something we talked about. Now I'm just going to open it up.
This is Christina. I just want to add that independent living centers are also required under WIOA to do transition services. So bringing in your local independent living center to a transition plan, specifically in high school, might be really helpful for families and individuals.
And that is it, unless anybody wanted to add that I missed something who was part of the conversation. Okay.
Nice. All right, thanks to everybody. Would you mind sharing those notes with me, Michelle? That'd be great, and then we'll incorporate the ones from Kimberly as well. Great, thank you all for that information. I know in the side room we definitely had engaging conversation. It looked like you did out here in the main room as well, so appreciate everyone's brain power, thoughts, input on that. And again, thanks to your staff, Kristin, for coming down and presenting and sharing info and even being open to this feedback. Yes,
Can I just
please.
ask a clarifying question? When we were talking about the indicators going through a revision of some sort, when is that happening? And if this body were to communicate with them regarding language around indicator 5, what would that take? Is that a motion from one of us to ask to have some sort of communication with them?
Yes, and as part of the rethink that we've heard about in the blog from the Office of Special Education Programs, there hasn't been any specific note of what exactly they're going to be focused on, but it wouldn't be the worst idea to let them know the things that you're concerned about so that they can hear from the stakeholders, and particularly the state panels, what is it that you think they should focus on that don't quite seem like they're working quite right.
Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate that information, and want to welcome Tom Adams, our Deputy over Instructional Practices. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, please.
Well, thank you. I didn't expect to say some words, but I'm Tom Adams. I'm the Deputy Superintendent for the Teaching and Learning Support Branch. First of all, let me just say, it's always inspiring for me to come here. I have to say, 4 years ago, Kristin Wright helped me understand the term of universal design for learning, something that was in our ELA, ELD framework. And lately, we've come to talk about the idea of individualized learning. And I was at a improvement science training the last 2 days, and we were talking about things, and the team I was working with, we all agreed on one thing, that teaching at the edges is when you learn the most. And we were talking specifically about special ed and how it's going to have an important role in the system of support, not just simply because it shows up on the dashboard, but more importantly, that's where you're going to learn the most about how you teach and who you teach and how you're going to approach that. So I'm looking forward to this commission joining us as part of the system of support, and all of us learning to grow together as we try to help each other out and make sure our kids get the best that they need.
Thank you so much. You know, I really appreciate you coming down. The commission definitely appreciates your engagement. And I do have to point out, at this meeting over the last couple of days, we've had a number of representatives from different departments or different divisions within the department. And the notion that we have one coherent system was a message that resonated through all of the presentations. And while historically we definitely have had folks be engaged and wanting to address the needs of any type of learner, in this meeting in particular, we saw each representative from the various divisions speak to the nuances of our different placements, our different types of learners, and just a real commitment, a genuine commitment to engaging the commission. Saw this very strong collaboration between the special ed division and other divisions. So just want to commend you for your leadership, and thank you for coming down, being supportive of this collaboration that we're definitely seeing play out in all aspects of this work.
Well, as someone once said to me, our limitations is how we instruct kids, not in our kids. So thank you. Have a good day.
Nice. Thanks so much. Okay, commissioners, just to finish up the discussion, previous discussion, we will make sure that our language, figure out the right way to incorporate that, and our language on item 5. Okay, I also thank you. Thank you so much, Carla Estrada, for joining us from the California Collaborative on Excellence in Education. Thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to see everyone again. And I just want to thank the commissioners, but also to Kristin Wright and to Gina Plate for your leadership in this work. We continue to appreciate the collaboration and just the leadership as we think about what do we want to do for our students with disabilities, building off what we know has worked really well and also recognizing there's deep urgency in some of the work that we need to do. And so I look forward to continuing to be a partner and an advocate along with you, but also to just know that we are here in service of our students and happy to be working with you. So thank you.
Nice. We definitely appreciate the partnership with the CCEE and your leadership in the work, Carla. So thank you very much. Okay, commissioners, we are moving on to item number 14, because you'll remember that we had item number 13. We put Director Wright on the spot as she walked in the door this morning, and she performed beautifully, so thank you. And so we are now on item number 14, Voices from the Field. So love to invite our stakeholders up. This is an opportunity for us to hear directly from stakeholders what's important. I know that we put a question out into the world to you all. Matt, do you want to read the question that went out to our stakeholder groups?
Sure. So the question was, with the new school year upon us, what information are you hearing from the field, and what topics do you feel the Advisory Commission on Special Education should focus on for the rest of the 2018-19 Commission meeting calendar?
Great, thank you. So love to invite, do you already have folks, Matt?
Yeah.
Great, fantastic.
First up, we have Kelly Connell-Sandler, CTA.
Press what? Sorry. Oh, okay, thanks. The good news is that it's almost a repeat of the good news last time, and the kind of self-congratulations and appreciation for what's been going on. And Rebecca Acord and I will be actually flying down tomorrow, she flies tonight, to our state council in LA, and we'll be happy to share in our liaison whole day meeting tomorrow the positive things that have happened, and it echoes what has just been said here. But I did want to say, and I'll shorten it up, but it's just in writing to you, CTA just appreciates this opportunity always to liaison with the Advisory Commission on Special Ed. So many positive developments, and I'm just reflecting of watching us write the strategic plan and then follow it through, and then what's been happening since then. The hard work we appreciate from all of you and from everybody here and at home as well. Particularly in recent years with this dedicated adherence to the strategic plan, to the ACSE strategic plan, the mission goals, and working together. And even today with eliciting meaningful data, because we always talk about data-driven, but my question always was, whose data, what data, and not enough data. So it's really wonderful to sit with people who really get it, that if we don't have meaningful data, we can't help our kids. So what we said was that we applaud this progress and recommend, as the Commission moves forward, an emphasis that will recommend and ensure that California preserves the continuum of services, protects IEPs and their implementation, protect and promote human rights, student rights, parental and teacher rights, support public education, work for full funding. Oh, where's Betty? Promote investment in technology, including training and support transition at all levels, pre-K to adult, school to college and career, support workability specialists, they saved me and my kids, support local decision-making, promote and ensure universal design and access to instruction tools and accountability, assessments, continue and increase opportunities for stakeholder input before and as decisions are made and legislation is proposed an amendment. And even there, I'm seeing baby steps, but positive ones. Thanked you all and thanked Matt tremendously as well for the fact that you now seek input ahead of time and give us a chance to reflect and get to our people and get back to you. It's all much appreciated. And I'm not going to come up again in another minute, but I just want to say the other thing we all hope for is be informed on issues, be particularly informed on educational issues and their implications, research your ledge, work in your local communities, and vote wisely and well. Not often, but wisely and well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelly.
All right. Nika Cox, Cars Plus.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for allowing us to be able to share our voices with you. I want to start off with yesterday in one of the breakout sessions. in the discussion, I had said that I wanted to remind you as a commission how important you really are. There was some doubt as to what they could have, like needing legislation to hear what they have to say. What I have to say to you, to all of you, is that legislation can't happen effectively until they hear from you, because you are our voices in the field, and that's the difference that it's going to make. So I thank you for doing that and all the hard work that it takes, but I want to remind you, you really are special people, so don't be afraid. Okay, the other thing is that the question, I got, approximately 40 or 50 responses to your question in the field. I shared with people that I had their email address so that you could have it in writing. But it was really pretty interesting because it went from universal access to intervention, co-teaching demands, and the big thing was time management. With all of it that is coming down that a teacher must do, there's more on their plate, less time to do it. So one of the concerns really, it rotated around what kind of language do we need to have either in ed code or in contract language that allots time for special educators to do their job. Because, a general ed teacher may have a curriculum that is set up and they've got 18 weeks in order to make these benchmarks, and it really won't matter if they miss 3 chapters. However, if a special ed teacher doesn't meet what's on the IEP, that's a federal case, literally. So they need the time and they're not awarded the time. So you're getting frustration and you're getting burnout and you're getting kids. The sad part is kids really aren't getting their services, not because they don't want to, but because there's no time to allow it. So I've been speaking with some of the CTA people to see if they could help with language, but if we could get the Board of Education to be able to actually really see what special ed has to do and to get it written into language to help us, because if it weren't for the district that I worked for actually putting language in our contract, I would have been totally overwhelmed. I was grateful that somebody had the foresight 20 years before me to do that, but I'm hearing of all of the responses, it was support, time management, and the other thing was, I found interesting, was fear of retribution if they complained. So that's what I also remind you, the CARS statewide conventions in Sacramento at the Doubletree this year, February 8th and 9th. And some of you here, we've been asked to be speakers, and we have people from Franklin Covey coming. They're going to do a session on time management. And I had attended it and went, ooh, wow, this is really cool. IEP could work on that. Somebody from Apple, the Education Executive Department, who's going to come with a bunch of free things to tell teachers that they could use. Nice. And some other corporations that I'm trying to bring in that can give tools to special educators. So I hope I can see you guys there, or you spread the word on us. Thank you.
Thank you, Nika.
Next up, Jane Flothi Ford, Parents Helping Parents, Family Empowerment Centers.
Welcome, Jane.
Hi, thank you for having us today. And I really do love all the applause and everything outside and the music in the food area. It's like, this is kind of a jump in place. The FEDC was presented this question, and the biggest concern they have is a shortage of teachers, credentialed teachers, preschool placement option, speech and language therapists, and special education teachers. We're finding more and more that our families are not getting the services in speech and language because there isn't anyone there. And I think it's people's intentions are honorable, but for whatever reason, we are missing services. And with that, we're seeing more IEPs that have, instead of having, the average, the amount of speech and language per week, we're getting buckets of years. For the year, you'll get 300 hours, et cetera. And so it keeps compliance, but does it provide a good IEP? And the concern that I have is that I believe that CDE currently isn't collecting that data on implementation. And so how do we know if these things are being implemented, and how can we monitor if we don't have that data? LAUSD is getting ready for a strike, and so that's a big issue. So it's just the shortage in the field that the families are feeling that their children are not being educated, don't have the aids, etc. The FEC is we're continue to plan for growth. We did not grow this year. We have 14 family empowerment centers. We'd like to see all 32, but we're kind of refocusing our orientation because we're going to be having some succession planning. We have some directors that'll be retiring, and so we're trying to keep making sure that the next group is well prepared for it. The other thing, the FEC, I'm speaking from Parents Helping Parents as an FEC. Funding has been a huge issue this year. We have not received our invoice from May and June. That was our last grant. We have put another invoice in for July and August. Still haven't seen it. So we're almost out $100,000. Parent agencies, and you guys can't do anything about it. It's just more on the record that, we need to make sure that these agencies, if we want to do the work that we want them to do, especially some of the smaller ones, they can't do it if we don't have the funding. And we are fortunate enough that we don't have to use line of credit, but many of the other ones have to use it, and then you have interest because you can't take it out of the grant. And so then instead of using that money towards families and for programs, it's going to pay interest. So if you have any words to anyone that can get, I know there's a new system going in, but it doesn't help when some of the agencies have to look at reducing hours for staffing. The PTIs, the same issue is shortage of teachers and professionals. But the other thing that the PTIs were very sad that the governor vetoed Senate Bill 354, which was to have IEPs translated. And I know that would have been a huge cost. I was talking to a SELPA director and she was going, yay, and I get it. It's an expensive prospect to have the IEPs translated within 30 days. But parents don't know, and the governor presumes that they do, that they don't know that they can have them translated. And we have some of our larger districts saying, don't tell them. And I have teachers calling me saying, what do I do? And I say, well, we'll make sure when we do our training to really highlight that, because some of our monolingual families do not know that they can ask for the IEP. And we received one the other day that if you do get the IEP, it'll be 6 to 9 months. It was written in the notes that the translation will happen during that time, which really surprised me. They put it in writing. But this is something, how can we have parents actively involved and engaged if they can't even read the document that's helping their children's education progress? So we were very saddened, and doesn't mean we won't try to rally. And our sister agency, DREDF, was a huge mover and shaker on this. We're very pleased with Susan and her team. But that's something that we were very sorry to see that happen. And that's it from the parent centers. Thank you for having us.
Great. Thank you, Jane.
Next up, Ann Vesey from SECO, Special Education Administrators of County Offices.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Matt. I was going to explain that, but he took care of that for me. So I am representing the special ed administrators for the county offices of education. I come from Riverside County Office of Ed, and I sent the question out to my colleagues as a part of SECO. And basically, things that came up for us was special education funding in general, and to also be of assistance to our colleagues that are SELPA administrators and looking at the SELPA allocation equalization and how that will come about in our state. Other things that are coming up that people are concerned about is the DAS, which is the alternative dashboard that we talked about yesterday. Mm-hmm. And one of the concerns is for our students, again, that are 20 to 22 years of age, that many of our county offices serve in their adult transition programs, and how that matches up with the CalPADS code. And yesterday when we finished, I had an opportunity to speak with them about that. So they were going to go back and look at that for us. So I think we've got some great answers coming from that end. The other piece that's coming out is obviously differentiated assistance and what that looks like for our county offices, and how are we going to, those of us who run programs and are also going to be supporting districts with differentiated assistance, what are our county offices doing to do that inclusively? And One of the wonderful things that I see happening and am really excited about is how many of our county offices are really breaking down barriers between program-related programs within the county office and education services that are happening out for districts. And we're becoming one unit as we move through to provide that differentiated assistance, which is a great feeling and a really good piece. Because for many, many years as special ed directors, we focus on compliance and we don't necessarily have the expertise for the curriculum kinds of things. And so to partner up with our ed services people that have those expertise has been absolutely wonderful. The other piece that has come up, because many of our county offices provide the services for children who are visually impaired, is, and I thought it was just us, but I'm finding out it's happening across the state, is we're having more and more local school sites that are not allowing us to take students off campus for their orientation and mobility experiences. So we've gotten support from our folks, from the individuals up here at CDE, and they have written a letter that we've been able to share, and it's made a big impact so that we can make sure that transition happens for those visually impaired students. So that's been great. A lot of training in improvement science, and people are really enjoying that. It's all going really well. And just to update you on one of the pieces for our SECO group is the SECO curriculum that's been written. And we have moved forward with that curriculum so that we are now, at the end of this school year, we will include the next generation science standards in the curriculum. So we're excited about that. And we all really appreciate all of the work that you do on behalf of the students that we serve. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anne.
Lastly, Susan Costin, SELPA administrators. And I have a handout for you guys I'll bring around.
Great.
Hi. Thank you for having me, and thank you for your dedication and commitment to supporting the students with special needs across the state. We have two topics that we'd like to have the commissions focus some energy and thought on for this year, and one is funding, and one is the statewide system of support. There's great disparity with the rates at which SELPAs are funded across the state, yet we're all held to the very same standard. So we would like the commission's support and champion equitable funding across the state for SELPAs, which would help students significantly and districts significantly improve services for students with special needs. In addition, there is no state funding for preschoolers with disabilities. There's ADA for K-12, but there's nothing for preschoolers. So the funding we're using for preschool is coming from the K-12 or billing back the district. So funding for preschool would be significantly helpful to improve those services. And then the statewide system of support, under the provisions outlined in the 18-19 budget, there were several items that fortunately aligned the system of support and SELPAs together. So we think it's important for the commission to get information about those items as they're being developed, and that's the annual assurance support plan, the SELPA regional content leads, what Kristin is doing and sharing with you, and then the annual budget plan. So we're really fortunate to work with Kristin and her team at CDE. A state SELPA organization is collaborating with many of our committees on these topics and developing some great tools that we're going to be making available to the field in the state. And certainly would love your input and comments on those as they're being developed.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you, Susan. Great. Okay, we definitely appreciate folks engaging their stakeholder groups, disseminating the question and bringing the feedback back to us. It helps us inform our agendas, inform our discussions, and gets the issues that you're experiencing in the field to the folks that can help develop the policies to address them. So thank you for that. We are moving into our final agenda items. I do want to appreciate and recognize Dominique Jones from Assemblymember Thurman's office. Thank you for being here. We know the Assemblymember has his hands full at the moment, and so I definitely appreciate you being here. So thank you. Matt, we're moving into item number 15, general public comment. Do we have commenters? Fantastic.
Kelly, are you still? Oh, you're good now? Oh, okay. Well, we have none.
Oh, no, she changed her mind.
Oh, no? Okay. Well, Kelly Connell Sandler, California Teachers Association.
And
this is, we can't promote anything. CTA, of course, has its strong endorsement, but I just wanted to acknowledge that how incredible Tony Thurmond has been. Just as previously, we've had incredible people sitting in that chair and coming. But I just think it's wonderful when people who lead and are in a position to lead are knowledgeable and take input and meaningfully. And just on a personal note, I just find Tony Thurmond, I was president of Costa, which is Alameda and Contra Costa County. I can't count how easily accessible he was. So again, everybody has their own right to their own vote and to be informed, but just that's the only thing. Is just I think sometimes we forget how hard it is to have our representatives come. And here in particular, when we sit in that meeting with liaisons, so many people never have any of that contact, and so it's really very much appreciated here. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Okay, so let me just piggyback on that and remind folks that on November 6th, you have the opportunity to exercise your voice in our process, so please make sure you're out doing that. Okay, item number 16, agenda building. So this is an opportunity separate from the items that we have talked about over the course of the last 2 days. Are there additional items that you think that we should be, as a leadership team, putting on our agenda for our February or upcoming meetings? And again, we do have an ongoing list. There's been a number of items that we've talked about over the last couple of days that folks have asked that we come back and revisit in February. So we have that list going. But are there additional topics we haven't hit on? Yes, Havania.
The California Teacher Commission, CTC, sent out an alert that the education specialist timeline will be pushed back to summer 2021. So I was hoping that someone can come up and represent CTC and explain. Kristin did touch on that a bit, but I think it would be helpful for a representative to come out and tell us what's going on with the timeline being pushed back to summer 2021.
Great. Thank you, Havania. I definitely appreciate your liaison role and just tracking what's happening with the CTC. So thank you, and definitely can invite them to give us an update. Yes, Mildred.
I just wanted to be sure that when we were talking about the short-term therapeutic residential placement, did that get on the list when you were taking notes?
Mm-hmm. That was on the list, yes. You know, it'd be nice to do, remember we had a panel maybe 2 meetings ago on just the basics of what CCR is and SCRTPs. It might be nice. I don't think Ann Jeanette was a part of that, but it might be nice to have her come and talk about some of the work that she's been doing as well.
There were actual questions in regards to access and concerns in regards to involving education. So it may be a little different spin than just talking about the process.
What's happening, absolutely. Thank you for that. Yep, great. Yeah, Christina and then Michelle.
You know, we've had our Youth Organizing Disabled and Proud program come and present.
Yeah.
But I've heard many panelists or many members this meeting talk about assistive technology. And CFILC also has a statewide assistive technology program. And one of our underserved communities is students with disabilities in the K-12 system, as well as early intervention. And if we could have our Ability Tools program come and talk about the partnership opportunities, that would be great. And if you're interested in looking at that before the presentation, I would invite you all to look at abilitytools.org. We do have device lending libraries around the state where schools and students, individuals, can take a loan out for 30 days to try a piece of assistive technology.
Nice. So remind me, who would be the best person to reach out to help coordinate that?
I will have Kevin Hansen on our staff, likely be the presenter of that presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Christina. Great. Yeah.
You read my mind because AT was going to be, I just didn't have anybody to bring, so thanks for filling that gap. I just want to make sure we're going to talk about the goal award rubric and have some time with whomever will be participating in judging those applications. And then also we're going to present the school, the commissioner, the young person. Great, okay.
Student commissioner, that's right, great. Thank you for that, Michelle. You know, Christina, one additional thought that came to mind when you were talking, a commissioner mentioned reminded me yesterday of the presentation we had of the timeline and the significant folks with disabilities that have impacted our history in such significant ways. I wonder, if I remember correctly, it was a roving presentation, and is there an updated version of that, or has that continued?
You're referring to the Paul Longmore Institute, San Francisco State University exhibit called Patients No More.
Yes.
It is a traveling exhibit. It hasn't necessarily been updated, but it is traveling across the country.
Oh, and it's still in
Yes, it is
on
still
the
in
road.
rotation.
Okay.
CFILC has that diagram sort of thing that we put out in CDE's lobby.
Yes.
That is available if folks
Okay,
want to use that. And we just got past the annual Disability History Week, which is the second week in October every year.
Okay, well, thank you for that. We'll make sure that gets on the calendar. Yeah, right. Thank you. I knew it came up for a reason. Yes, Havania.
Did we talk about reviewing the alternative curriculum, the SACO curriculum from Riverside?
We did not.
I think we addressed that at our last meeting. I would think that's a good idea.
Okay, thank you for reminding us. I know we have this ongoing list of things that folks have recommended, so we will definitely make sure that stays on the list. Thanks, Havania. Other items folks want to make sure get on to our list of considerations for our time together? All right, hearing, Kimberly.
We had talked about, I want to make sure and just clarify what format the alternative diploma discussion will take moving forward if we're researching or looking at states' information. Is that something that's going to be brought forward? Is there information maybe we could jigsaw in a breakout just to inform us about some ideas that might have?
Yeah, that can absolutely be brought forward, and my staff and the Transition Alliance has done a bunch of research, so maybe we can put something together if you guys are interested in that to get our wheels turning around that.
I'd love for our policy and ledge groups to be looking at that and really informing us.
Great. Okay, thank you for that, Kimberly. Other items? Last chance? Okay, commissioners. Yes, Matt.
Just a couple things.
Yeah.
First off, committee chairs, as we discussed in operations and planning, the next couple days, 4 or 5 days, if you can get me your draft agendas for the February meetings, that'd be great. Mildred's an all-star. She's already done that.
Mildred.
And then on top of that, just for your meeting binders and orientation binders, remember the small binder stays here if you had 2. And you're welcome to take any of the resources from your packet. Just don't take the blue folders in your packets. Those. And then lastly, from our discussion yesterday afternoon committee, if anyone needs to email me any of the information that they discussed as far as changes to the strategic plan or the letter, please do that, today or in the near future, so it's fresh in your mind.
Great. And I did get a couple, Matt, that I'll forward to you. Okay, commissioners, we are closing out our October meeting. Just want to say thank you for your time. I know, as I said yesterday, this is a really busy time of year. Appreciate you taking the opportunity to come up, share your brain, share your thoughts, and and have safe travels. We won't see you again until February. A lot is going to change between now and February. And we have the holidays. So enjoy. We will be in touch. And thank you again. Have a great afternoon.